All right, guys. So today we are talking about effective imagery, which is as a concept, actually, a little bit simpler to understand in terms of, how to apply it. Like it's a pretty cut and dry process. It's like, hey, put yourself in the shoes that you want to be in and use that to motivate you and get yourself to where you want to be, um and or maybe it's like, hey, look, this thing that you struggle with, let's like walk through that process and imagine yourself like doing it, the way that you might want to do it. I do that sometimes. I will be honest, I'm totally upfront with you guys. Imagery is not something that I'm sort of naturally gifted at personally. It's definitely not something that I am sort of naturally good at sort of doing, like sitting down and using my imagination to kind of craft out like a scenario and stuff. Um, but it is definitely something that I do. I can't tell you how often, and this has kind of helped me when it comes to like heavy sets. I'll just like between that set in if I've got like, let's say 30 seconds of rest left, I'll sit down and just run through my head like, okay, this is what it's going to look like. I'm going to lay back on the bench. My head's going to be touching right here. And this is what that's going to kind of feel like. I'm going to grab the weight here and here, and I'm going to lower that down to my chest. And I'm going to get all 5 of these heavy reps. And I might start getting tired around like 3, but I'm going to power that out. I'm going to keep my core tight and engaged. Now, so I'll kind of mentally run myself through and I will see myself successfully performing my next set. And it has kind of helped. I find that it's actually made me a little bit more effective in the gym. And so that's one way that that's sort of a short-term version, but there's also long-term versions of that we're sort of going to look at here. So excited to talk about imagery. It's definitely a very fun technique. Some people are really great at it. Me personally, I feel like my imagination, one of the things that you look for when you're analyzing whether or not your imagery is good is your controllability. And that's the big thing that I struggle with a lot, is like sometimes my imagery starts to kind of run wild. But so if we're defining what imagery is, right, it is basically where you are using sort of visualization, right? And that's what you'll hear people call it sometimes. Sometimes you'll hear imagery, sometimes you'll hear visualization. It's all, kind of it's a blanket term to kind of describe all of it. But what it is you are using all of your senses, or whatever senses are at least appropriate, to create or recreate an experience in your brain. Right. So like you are imagining yourself doing something. And that may sound like, well, I'm not physically doing it. So how can I get better at it? Well, we've got some really cool stuff to show you today. But things to remember about imagery, it is a polysensory event, which means that you want to actually use all of your senses as much as you can. When I was describing sort of imagining myself having a successful bench press set, part of that was I imagine what the bar is going to feel like, the feeling of my head back here, sort of what the temperature is in the air and stuff. Maybe what it smells like, actually, what I'm hearing. The more I can do all of those things, the more detailed it is, the more likely I am to kind of trick my brain into thinking that it is a real thing. And that's really what we're kind of going for here. So we're sort of simulating in our brain, this event or this emotion. It can be used for that as well. We're sort of simulating this whole process so that we can sort of teach our brain, look, we can do exactly whatever we want to do. So really, really fun. Like I said, you are either creating something from scratch, maybe it's something you want to achieve, or you are sort of recreating experiences that you maybe want to replay and do more successfully. Thomas, I don't know if you played any sports or anything, or Bay, if you've played any sports, but if you've ever had a coach and you've maybe done a play the wrong way, and then your coach sits down, it's all right, here's what I want you to do. They explain it, and that's good, but that can be even a little bit more effective if it's I want you to run through it in your brain first real quick. Close your eyes and imagine you're gonna make this step here, and then you're gonna shift your weight here. Do you play any sports, Thomas?
Yes, all through my childhood.
Love it. And so like that sort of like recreation of things, it's like, so here's what we did wrong. I want you to imagine like running this route correctly, right? And you kind of run through it in your brain. It makes it a lot easier, a lot more approachable, because it's almost as if you've already done it once, you know?
Exactly.
And so maybe this new thing feels more similar to practice than it does a, you know, new thing. So that's really what we're kind of going for here, right? Recreating experiences that you've already like done that you want to sort of take a little bit more control over. You can also use it like to recreate like sort of emotions and thoughts and things like that. I'll tell you one thing, the one way that I am terrific at using imagery, and what's up, Thomas? Good morning. Uh,
Good morning.
you can tell me if you guys do this as well. Does anybody in here win all of their arguments while they are in the shower? That is something that I have been doing since a kid. You know, has nothing to do with me purpose, but it's like, you know, you get into an argument with somebody and then like you're showering the next day and it's like, I should have said this, and then if they would have said this, then I would have countered with this, and then they're gonna say this, but then I would have said this, you know. That's sort of a version of imagery that like I kind of like tend to like do, where it's like, or like you know, sometimes I'll even do it when I'm like prepping for like a date or something. I'll be sitting there and it's like, if they say this, then I'm gonna say this really cool thing like this. And so that's kind of like a kind of a funny thing that, you know, is kind of an example of imagery. It can be used to sort of like help you control your emotions. If you need to like kind of vent everything out, like I would never want to say, you know, something where I'm very frustrated and angry, you know, and emotional. I want to be like level. I want to be able to like communicate effectively so that like I can maintain my relationships rather than, you know, flying off the handle because like I get really emotional and I say something I don't necessarily mean. So if I can like kind of walk myself through that process ahead of time, it can kind of calm me down and help me sort of cope, you know? So that's one of the really cool things about using imagery as well. So it can be used to enhance your motivation, which is really fun. That's another way to do things. Like if you see yourself succeeding at something, you're much more likely to try to stick to it, you know? This is why anybody who uses like vision boards or anything like that, that's been shown to be a pretty effective tool. You know, like some people take, you'll hear countless stories. It's like every guy does. I've never done this, you know, but you know, no judgment if you're one of these folks, but like the picture of the Ferrari or like the Lamborghini or whatever, like guys, I feel like it's always cars whenever guys are giving an example of this. For me, it's like I want to have a house, you know, like but it's like you know, you put that picture, you see it every single day and you're like, that's right, that's what I'm working towards. And of course I'm going to do it in, you know, whatever time and stuff. There's a really great story in I was telling you guys about Smarter, Better, Faster. What's the guy's name? Dilbert comic strip creator. What's that guy's name? Scott Adams. Scott Adams repetition exercise. Oh, you know what? It's actually, now I think about it, it's not actually in Smarter, Better, Faster. It's in another book called Mind Hacking. So the guy who created the Dilbert comic strip is a pretty interesting dude. He actually like, yeah, I think he was like working in financing, which is where he got the inspiration for you know, the Dilbert comic strip and stuff. But he like wanted to get, you know, his comic published, right? And by the way, Dilbert is huge. It's like one of these, you know, it's been around and it's in, you know, X number of countries and syndication and stuff. I think it's still being created today, but like what he did is he's like, he wanted to become like a cartoonist, and so he kind of consistently sort of focused on that until eventually, like, you know, he kind of did it all the time. And so then he had a friend who was like, hey, you know, you should and he had other goals, by the way. He had like, he wanted to you know, he wanted to get wealthy, he wanted to get the GMAT, which is like his master's. He needed to like pass this one specific test. You have to get like above the 77th percentile, is that what it says? Oh no, he scored originally in the 77%. You got to get in the 94th percentile to be able to get into this one school. So his friend was like, hey, Scott, what you should do is you should write down every day consistently whatever it is that you want to sort of achieve. And so he was like, well, he's like, I want to become wealthy. And so he's like, and so every day he would write down, I, Scott Adams, will become rich. So he kind of wrote that down consistently every day. And he got up every morning. He did it every single time. And I'm curious, yeah, 15 times. He did it 15 times a day. So he'd write it 15 times, right? And it was just one of those things where like he was dedicated to this thing. He was dedicated to this action that, eventually made this thing that's sort of a wish a reality, right? Like it's and here's the thing, like a lot of people will talk about the idea of like manifestations and stuff like this. People will talk about the power of what's the secret or whatever, like I can't remember what they call it. What's the secret called? There's a term for that, manifesting stuff. Here's the thing, I'm not going to judge any of that, but I will say like I personally don't really believe in any of that. I don't believe that like when you put something out into the universe, it magically comes your way. But what I do firmly believe in, and I think it is a measurable thing that like we have seen people succeed with, is that the more often you preoccupy on something and the more you think about something, the more that you will make small, tiny adjustments in your life that your life will eventually reflect this thing that you're aiming towards. So like he eventually like invested and he picked some specific stocks, and those stocks ended up like blowing up, and so he actually earned enough money, and so like that was kind of cool. And that's where like some people are like, well, see, it's a manifestation. I'm like, I don't know, you put money in the stock market, generally you're going to come out ahead. Not everybody, but most of the time. So then later he tried the exact same thing, and he wanted to get into like a master's program, and he has to pass this test called the GMAT. And so he said, and he has to get at least a 94th percentile. First time he ever did it, he got like a 77. So again, 15 times a day, he was like, I, Scott Adams, will score in the 94th percentile on the GMAT. And he went and, he did that every single day. He studied his butt off. This wasn't like he just, it's definitely, this is so not magic, like, and sure enough, he scored exactly in the 94th percentile. He, absolutely nailed it. And that got him to be able to work on his MBA. And then eventually he was like, I, Scott Adams, will become a syndicated cartoonist. And Dilbert is now in 2,000 newspapers, 65 different countries, and 25 different languages, all through like a little bit of sort of repetition. So if you guys want, there's a really cool little article that you can read actually, that is actually an excerpt from this book called Mind Hacking, which is a really kind of a fun one as well. And this is just a really good example of sort of how imagery actually kind of works, right? This consistent repetition can be used not only to enhance like your self-confidence, to help you recreate and like sort of control your emotions. It can also be used to enhance your motivation. When Scott was consistently writing this thing down, right, it reinforced the idea that like, yeah, this is going to happen, rather than like this might happen, or oh, I wish this could happen, right? It's like, no, it's a reality. Like this is the next thing, it's like this, that's what's going to happen next, so it's kind of a fun thing. And they've actually looked at the reason that imagery is so effective, and we're going to talk about like sort of where that is. Like I said, it can be useful in helping you control your anxiety and things like that as well. But we'll take a look at that in just a second. So there's a lot of really cool anecdotal reports. This is a fun story. This is an anecdote, that sort of points. And here's the thing, guys. When it comes to the scientific process of things, anecdotal evidence is the worst type of evidence. When someone's like, oh, well, I heard my brother's sister's cousin, experience this thing. And it's like, that's not the world's greatest evidence there. It's like, she got healthy and lost a bunch of weight by eating gummy bears every day. And it's like, I mean, that could be true, but I find that unlikely. Like that's anecdotal evidence. It's like a story that you heard from someone. So I'm not saying this is the only, I've got a lot of fun stories today, but don't let that be the only thing that you hear. There's also been case studies where they've actually like researchers have asked people to record specific behaviors that they want to achieve consistently and it has been shown to work. And then there's actually been experimental studies where the imagery is sort of manipulated against a specific control group. So I want to give you show you a little video here that kind of talks about that.
For years, science.
Oh, I forgot this is going to automatically play. So this is a really fun video by ASAP Science, one of my favorite channels on YouTube. But this is going to tell you a little bit about like how powerful our thoughts are and how they can be used to do some really, really, really cool things.
For years, scientists believed that the brain was static, unchanging, and locked. But our understanding has changed drastically to the point where we now see the brain as plastic and constantly changing. But what if I told you that simply
thinking could affect not only the way your brain works, but its physical shape and structure as well? It turns out this is exactly what happens. From a neuroscientific standpoint, imagining an action and doing it require the same motor and sensory programs in the brain. For example, if you were to close your eyes and imagine the letter B, the primary visual cortex lights up in the same way it does when you look at the letter on the screen. Take a moment and imagine yourself writing out your signature with your dominant hand. Chances are, the amount of time it takes you to simply imagine doing it is similar to how long it actually takes to write it out. Try doing the same thing with your non-dominant hand and it actually takes you longer to write and imagine. How is this relevant? Well, because imagination and action are actually integrated and engage the same neural pathways, practicing one actually influences the other. One fascinating study took two groups and had them practice piano for 2 hours a day, except one group was only allowed to use mental practice. They couldn't touch the piano, but would sit in front of it and imagine practicing. The surprising result? The exact same physical changes took place in the motor cortex of both groups. And after 3 days, their accuracy in playing was the exact same. Beyond 5 days, the physical practice group did begin to excel faster, but the imagination group, when given the chance to practice physically, was able to catch up to their skill level quickly. Perhaps more incredible is an experiment which used imagination in an effort to strengthen muscles. Both groups did the same figure muscle exercises for 4 weeks, though one group simply did it mentally. Those who actually did the physical exercise increased their strength by 30%, while those who imagined doing it increased their muscle strength by 22%. This is because the neurons responsible for the movement instruction were still being used and strengthened, resulting in increased strength when the muscles actually contracted. So, while your thoughts don't have some mystical or magical power, mental practice is an effective way to prepare for a physical skill. Each thought actually changes the structure and function of your brain by affecting the neurons at the microscopic level. Though, as much as we wish you could sit there and become the next Mozart, it won't happen without a lot of hard physical work. But a little imagination never hurts. This episode of ASAP Science is supported by Audible.com, the leading provider of audiobooks with over 100,000 downloadable titles across all types of literature. This episode was inspired by the book The Brain That Changes Itself by Norman Doidge. You can download this audiobook or another of your choice for free at audible.com/ASAP. Special thanks to Audible for making these videos possible and offering you a free audiobook at audible.com/ASAP. And subscribe for more weekly science videos.
So, what the heck? I could do that. So that's so cool, right? Like, you actually see how like the brain can physically change itself, just like a tangible like thing, simply by using your imagination. You know, like imagining yourself doing specific things has a physical, tangible difference, right? And you know, we can track this because we've actually talked about this in our previous classes. You know, why is it that new clients get so much stronger so rapidly? You know, it's not because they're putting on massive amounts of muscle, it's because their nervous system is getting better at the movements. And so like if you are trying to imagine yourself being a specific way, you know, the more often you imagine that, the more you are sort of reinforcing that and, you know, kind of turning it into a reality. So like I said, you can use imagery to enhance like your self-confidence, like learning how to just, you know, see yourself as a confident, competent person, you know. Both of those things are really helpful, especially in like sports and exercise and things like that. I've definitely kind of changed the way I definitely have changed the way I talk about myself. Like, you know, I compliment myself when I feel like I deserve it. And I, you know, yeah, I still like chastise myself when I don't, you know, sort of perform things the way I want to. But like, I definitely, you know, if somebody asks me, it's like, do you see yourself as a confident person? there is maybe a small part of me in the back of my brain that still not, has like doubts and things like that, and maybe not, but like if anybody ever asks me that, I will always say yes. Like, yeah, I'm absolutely confident, because that is what I want to be. And so the more often I say it, the more it's going to reinforce it. Do you see yourself as an effective, successful personal trainer? Everybody in this call right now, I hope you guys are saying, yeah, I'm going to be the freaking greatest trainer in the world. My Bay, I want to, my gym is going to be the most successful in the area, like, that's the kind of stuff you want to say consistently. You say it consistently and it will, you are going to strengthen the neurons that are going to actually like cause you to do things. It'll be a lot easier where you're like doing these things that might feel a little bit difficult at first. So here's another really fun video that is also very similar. This is another anecdotal evidence here, but like the science of practice. So this one's a little bit more about like how to actually be better about practicing for things, and how practice is going to help you actually sort of strengthen these habits and strengthen these neurons and stuff. So this is a fun video about how to practice effectively, or the science of practice. I'm talking about practice. I sound like Allen Iverson. All right, here we go.
Mastering any physical skill, be it performing a pirouette, playing an instrument, or throwing a baseball, takes practice. Practice is the repetition of an action with the goal of improvement, and it helps us perform with more ease, speed, and confidence. So what does practice do in our brains to make us better at things? Our brains have two kinds of neural tissue, gray matter and white matter. The gray matter processes information in the brain, directing signals and sensory stimuli to nerve cells, while white matter is mostly made up of fatty tissue and nerve fibers. In order for our bodies to move, information needs to travel from the brain's gray matter down the spinal cord through a chain of nerve fibers called axons to our muscles. So how does practice or repetition affect the inner workings of our brains? The axons that exist in the white matter are wrapped with a fatty substance called myelin, and it's this myelin covering or sheath that seems to change with practice. Myelin is similar to insulation on electrical cables. It prevents energy loss from electrical signals that the brain uses, moving them more efficiently along neural pathways. Some recent studies in mice suggest that the repetition of a physical motion increases the layers of myelin sheath that insulates the axons. And the more layers, the greater the insulation around the axon chains, forming a sort of superhighway for information connecting your brain to your muscles. So while many athletes and performers attribute their successes to muscle memory, muscles themselves don't really have memory. Rather, it may be the myelination of neural pathways that give these athletes and performers their edge with faster and more efficient neural pathways. There are many theories that attempt to quantify the number of hours, days, and even years of practice that it takes to master a skill. While we don't yet have a magic number, we do know that mastery isn't simply about the amount of hours of practice. It's also the quality and effectiveness of that practice. Effective practice is consistent, intensely focused, and targets content or weaknesses that lie at the edge of one's current abilities. So if effective practice is the key, how can we get the most out of our practice time? Try these tips. Focus on the task at hand. Minimize potential distractions by turning off the computer or TV and putting your cell phone on airplane mode. In one study, researchers observed 260 students studying. On average, those students were able to stay on task for only 6 minutes at a time. Laptops, smartphones, and particularly Facebook were the root of most distractions. Start out slowly or in slow motion. Coordination is built with repetitions, whether correct or incorrect. If you gradually increase the speed of the quality repetitions, you have a better chance of doing them correctly. Next, frequent repetitions with allotted breaks are common practice habits of elite performers. Studies have shown that many top athletes, musicians, and dancers spend 50 to 60 hours per week on activities related to their craft. Many divide their time used for effective practice into multiple daily practice sessions of limited duration. And finally, practice in your brain in vivid detail. It's a bit surprising, but a number of studies suggest that once a physical motion has been established, it can be reinforced just by imagining it. In one study, 144 basketball players were divided into two groups. Group A physically practiced one-handed free throws, while Group B only mentally practiced them. When they were tested at the end of the 2-week experiment, the intermediate and experienced players in both groups had improved by nearly the same amount. As scientists get closer to unraveling the secrets of our brains, our understanding of effective practice will only improve. In the meantime, effective practice is the best way we have of pushing our individual limits, achieving new heights, and maximizing our potential.
So that's a little bit more. That's another example of like anecdotal evidence, right? Like, which again, not the greatest. We get to read these studies, and then we got a case study, or we could look at experimental studies. We could actually do an experiment ourselves and sort of practice this. No pun intended, but but that is a really good example of like how we see imagery work in our sort of daily lives, right? So if there's anything you guys are working on right now, I do encourage you to kind of imagine yourself successfully doing that regularly. One of the things that we're going to talk about sort of at the end here, I'm sorry, one of the things that we talked about when we were talking about cognitive behavioral therapy is we were talking about the idea of healthy obsessions, right? Obsessions where you're sort of daydreaming about these things that are like really good for you, well, that is an example of how like imagery and your cognition sort of meet up, right? The more often you are imagining yourself in this really positive way or in this thing that you want to achieve, and the more often you kind of do that, the more likely you are to sort of experience that success. So it can be used to enhance, like I said, it can be used to enhance your motivation. It can also be used to help you control your mental, emotional responses to things. If you are somebody who might struggle like communicating when you get frustrated, sort of mentally preparing for a conversation that you're going to have with someone can be very, very helpful. Putting yourself in that similar setting, put yourself in a similar place, like emotionally, and just kind of processing that. That's a really important thing. This is one of the reasons why some people like, you'll hear about this as a technique when you're arguing with others, where you kind of you pump the brakes for a second, take a moment to kind of process things and then respond. If you sort of run through your head really quickly what it is that you're going to say and how you want to say it, you're going to be a much more effective communicator. And it has been shown to, improve your concentration. Like I was saying in the second video that we watched, researchers have observed people, and they find that people get distracted very, 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 very easily. And that distraction is something that we actively want to avoid. The more often you are actually practicing something, the more dedicated you are to it. Think about the last time you set your cell phone down because you got into something that you were really excited about. And then when did you check it again? Probably not for a while, it's very easy. But then like things that maybe don't hold our attention as well, we get distracted, we get on our phones, we start glancing at things, right? And that's, or we open up a window, check Instagram, check Facebook, stuff like that. And it sort of wrecks our concentration. So if you are imagining yourself doing something, you get more invested in that something. And then that's going to improve your concentration because you are less likely to sort of get drawn away. I'm sure that like everybody in this call has had something where, you've gotten kind of intensely focused. When I was a kid, and I first started playing like video games and stuff, on like the PC. It was like a big deal for me. I was like, oh, these are like serious games. I remember just getting like wrapped up in this one game, and I would play it with my friend, and we would like log in together. I'd call him and be like, hey man, here's the number to log into the thing, and we'd get on the same server and be able to play. And I like called his house and I was like, hey man, like, can you play? And his brother answered the phone, and his brother's like, what? And I was like, oh, is Nick there? Can I talk to Nick? And he was like, it's like 2 a.m. You can't be calling this late. And I was like, what? I like looked at the clock and it was freaking 2 in the morning. I've been playing all day. So unhealthy, not good. But like it blew my mind. And I was like, oh my God, I was so wrapped up. I was so concentrated on this freaking game that like I didn't realize how freaking late it had gotten. Little did I know there'd be many more hours of video games later in the years of my life. But that's, the more likely, the more stuff you are invested in, the more you have that concentration, the less likely you are to get distracted, which means, again, if you are practicing for something, that practice is going to be much more effective. So how the heck does this work? Like, what's going on here? Well, there's sort of a couple different theories or thoughts, and probably all of these things are sort of describing how imagery is working and why it is so effective and stuff. One of those things is what we call psychoneuromuscular theory. And basically what psychoneuromuscular theory states is that imagery will facilitate the learning of motor skills due to the nature of how the brain activates during neuromuscular patterns. So you guys might remember from exercise physiology when we talked about how neurons actually work. We got to remember that like your thoughts are physical things. I know that like sometimes our thoughts feel like these really intangible things that are, in the mind, which is like, how the heck do you measure something that's in the, it's like, it's our imagination. It seems like an intangible thing, but like every thought that you make, every action that you take, all of that is like an actual physical thing. It is a neuron firing from one spot to another, to another, to another. And what makes our thoughts different is whatever order those neurons fire in and whatever path it sort of takes. So, if we look at like, just like, let's look at a picture of like we'll pull up a picture of several neurons here. So, okay, so here's like a little picture of just like a bunch of neurons, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we'll say, right? So if I were to go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6, that could be, and maybe these are the neurons that are in my taste buds, right? They're attached to my nervous system, attached to the chemoreceptors in my mouth, right? So if I went from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6, maybe that's something that tastes really sweet. But if my brain is trying to send a signal, or if the neurons are trying to send a signal to my nervous system saying, this is really salty, well, maybe instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it would go 1, 3, 4, 2, 5, 6, right? And that different order is going to be a different thought. And you have billions of neurons, which is why we can have so many different thoughts and so many different actions and so many different feelings and emotions and everything. And that's literally how things work. And then if we know that that's sort of how like our thoughts and our actions work, well, the other thing we got to look at is like what a neuron looks like, right? Go back to the shape of a neuron. It is this classic cell body, and then there's this big long tail here where these electrochemical signals are traveling, and there's this fatty material, this myelin, surrounding the tails of our neurons, and that's protecting those signals. Now, when we talk about this is an electrochemical signal. What happens, guys, when you run electricity through something? Well, when you do that, electricity burns stuff, right? Like, so this is, I think I've showed this to you guys before, but this is this is an actual kind of an artistry technique in the realm of woodworking, but this is what's known as the Lichtenberg effect. And it's actually where you're gonna take like a piece of wood and you like soak that wood with a little bit of water. So you can see he's like putting a little bit of water over it and then drying it off for the most part so it's not too wet. But then he's got these little like pieces of metal that are going in there, and metal conducts electricity. And then this is connected to, I'm not going to say it's a car battery, but essentially a car battery. and he's running electricity through this. And so that electricity is kind of running. And notice how like it's branching out at the end, right? But where it has already burned in, it's just deepening the burns, right? They're just getting a little bit darker. Well, that's what happens when you run electricity through something. You know, it creates like a burn. Look at how deep these burns eventually got, right? The longer you kind of let it run through there, the deeper and deeper this burning sensation kind of gets. That's happening inside your nervous system. Like you are burning your neurons. They're getting, you know, a little burnt up. But what that does is that creates like a really strong groove. And so now when you are going to think about something, when you or do something, it's a lot easier for that electricity to travel a lot faster, which means that that thought is sort of reinforced. This is one of the reasons, this psychoneuromuscular theory, this is one of the reasons why our habits are so hard to break. You know, the more you do something, the more you're burning in that groove, and the much faster that signal is going to travel. So like if you're consistently giving your brain sugary candy, you know, your brain is going to get addicted to that. It's going to be like, oh, well, I'm really good at, you know, experiencing like sweetness. You know, I'm really, really good at sort of like creating sweet signals to the nervous system. And so then your brain's like, I want to keep doing that thing that I'm really good at, you know. It's more likely to do that every time. Smoking, same thing, right? Like your brain gets really good at sending signals about nicotine. Or if you look at like practicing things that you are sort of addicted to, you know, like me, I love exercise. Everybody in this call probably loves exercise, right? I should freaking hope. You know, and there are days where it's like, I didn't get to exercise. And it's like, I'll get like really antsy and kind of like amped up, and I have all this like extra sort of excess of energy that I need to burn off, you know? And that's because my nervous system is like, hey, we want to use this stuff that we've developed. We want to use the stuff that we're good at. So psychoneuromuscular theory is that your brain will fire in a very similar way to whatever it is that you are imagining, because it's actually using those neural pathways that are the same neural pathways that you would actually use when you physically do something. So whatever neural pathways are controlling my arm during like a lateral raise, if I imagine myself doing that lateral raise, parts of those are still actually firing. And they've actually looked at this through EMG analysis. They've put electrodes on people's muscles and asked them to imagine themselves doing something, even though they haven't done it, you know? The last example I'll give you kind of this to really drive this point home. You've all experienced a little bit of this before, right as you're falling asleep. You know, when you're falling asleep and you're good, and you know, maybe you just start to dream just barely, and then you trip over something in that dream and like you trip and then you go, ah! Like, it feels like you're falling. All of a sudden you wake up and you're like, God, or your leg kicks out or something like that. I'll often have dreams about like doing like playing sports or something, and then like I'll end up like jerking all of a sudden. It wakes me up sometimes. But that is, you know, that is your brain is thinking about doing something, and then it actually fires the muscles that it is going to use to do that action and stuff. So that's a little bit of the psychoneuromuscular. It's where the psychology of your brain actually sort of incorporates your muscular system, right? Now, there's also a little bit about what's called symbolic learning theory. This is another thing that kind of explains why imagery works as well as it does. And basically, this is saying that imagery is helping the brain coordinate your thoughts, your actions, and your emotions into sort of like a coding system, right? So it's helping us sort of understand these patterns because it's sort of helping us compartmentalize information, right? So like a good example of like you know, symbolic learning theory is the more often you see something, the more often you do something, the sort of more repetition there is, the better you get at it. So it can be very helpful for learning like movement patterns consistently, quickly, and efficiently. You know, that consistent practice is a big part of this. Like you are practicing this thing, and so then your brain gets in the habit. It's like, oh, this is my dedicated time to focus strictly on this, you know? it's why, like, at this point, man, as much as I do love working out, I don't know if I could work out without listening to something. Sometimes I listen to podcasts, sometimes I listen to a lot of music, that's usually the default. But like, I don't know if I could even do it without, because now I've like tied that so much to the idea of working out. I've kind of like connected these two things. I don't know if I could do it without, I think I'd probably like lose motivation pretty quickly. And that's part of like symbolic learning theories, where like, things are going to kind of link together. You get sort of attached to a setting, or you get attached to this other thing because you are consistently practicing it and performing it, which is great because that makes you really good things. Like I imagine when LeBron walks onto a basketball court, he's a lot better than if you were to just hit him. Maybe he's dressed the same way, he's in his gear and stuff. But what if you were to set up like a basketball hoop, exactly the same regulation height, exactly the same, like, regulation rim, whatever, give him a regulation ball. But if he had to shoot it like just on the street, for the record, I mean, he's a world-class athlete. I'm sure he would probably still make that basket very easily. But like, I would be willing to bet that he would perform measurably worse, rather than like being on a basketball court where like it sounds like a basketball court, it smells like a basketball court, it feels like one under his feet. Like those things, like that little bit of stuff, that symbolism is really key in us sort of getting better at certain things. And so when you can create that or recreate that in your brain, it will transfer over to when you're in the real world. And then there is the bioinformational theory, which I think is kind of the funnest one personally, but that's because I tend to be very analytical. But bioinformational theory is that like imagery is basically helping you because it's a set of propositions. What I mean by propositions is like, if we look at like a flow chart, right? Here's sort of an example of a simple flow chart. I'm trying to get one here. No. Flow chart, morning routine. Let's find that example. Here we go. Okay, this is a weird one about homework. So you ask yourself a question: should I do my homework now? Right now, you got a little flow chart to kind of describe this, right? Well, first thing you need to ask yourself: do you have homework? If the answer to that is yes, then we need to come down here. If the answer is no, well then great, we're in the go ahead and relax thing. But then like, are you lying to yourself? And in this case, hey, guess what? They both end up in the same spot. Both of these are going to end up here. Is it due in less than 12 hours? If the answer to that is yes, then you better start freaking doing your homework, right? But if the answer is no, well, maybe you can watch a little bit of TV, maybe you can play some games, maybe you can get on social media for a little bit, and then eventually ask yourself that same question again: is it due in less than 12 hours? And once you get to that deadline, it's like, boom, that's when you start working. So we sort of flowed through this whole process here. You asked yourself yes or no questions to sort of get you where you need to get. And sometimes that chart sort of flows back to where we started, but like, it's a series of like little proposition questions, right? I want to find like a better example. Okay, yeah, here's sort of a blank flow chart that actually doesn't, but it's like you start like an activity, and then like, you go through the first thing, and then you have a yes or no decision, right? If it's yes, then you're going to go with option A. If it's no, you're going to go with option B, and then that's going to branch off. And it's like option A is going to be like, all right, is that yes or no? Is that option A, A1, and then option A2, and then it moves down to the next one. If it was option A2, it's option A2, like it gets like longer and longer and longer. So when you practice things, you're creating these little flow charts in your brain. When you use imagery to sort of walk through something, your brain is actually like learning how to sort of set up this sort of flow chart, which is going to allow you to like move through things a lot faster, so that's what bioinformational theory is like, which I love that. I think that that's a really fun sort of thing. So we'll see, like, your image is basically this set of propositions, yes or no. Like, hey, did we do this? Did we do this? And it's like, oh God, I didn't do that, right? And it's like, well, do you need to right now? And it's like, yeah, I probably do. So there's a couple different versions of this. There's stimulus propositions, there's response propositions. Doesn't really matter which ones that you've got, but both of them are going to be, sort of part of your flow chart, right? Stimulus propositions describe specific stimuli related to like whatever scene it is that you're generating. So like, you're basically asking yourself like, where am I? And what do I smell? What do I see? What do I hear? All that. But then there's also like response propositions, which are like describing like your emotional and physical response. Like if someone says this, does that upset me? Yes or no? And you're like, it does upset me. Do I want, am I, should I be upset at this, or am I being irrational? Yes or no? And so that way, like you can kind of walk your way through, and hopefully that will give you a better control of responses that you have. And that way, like maybe you don't fly off the handle when you're in an argument with somebody. So that is a little bit there. How you guys feeling so far? Any questions on any of that, or comments? Cool comments. I got cool thumbs up from Bay. The Thomases are feeling good. All right.
Indeed.
Love it. So that's why imagery works so well. It's so darn fun. All right. So now, how do we do this? How do we make people better at imagery? How do we, if we're trying to use imagery effectively, we want to make sure that we're pretty good at, sort of walking someone through the process of imagery, using imagery as like a technique. Like I said, like Phil Jackson, he was the king of visualization. I don't know what I'm looking for when I'm Googling this. Maybe a fun image about him. Yeah, I guess not. All right, Phil Jackson was there's a quote. No, that's not. But like Phil Jackson was like, he was great at using imagery. He would often tell his players to imagine himself. He was really big on like mindfulness and just like taking awareness of things, rather than letting things sort of be unconscious. You guys will remember that my literal favorite video on the internet. I know I said about so many videos, but the graduation speech by David Foster Wallace, the This is Water, right? That is all about sort of developing awareness, rather than letting things sort of become like a default setting. He's like, like everybody, you are allowed to get frustrated when you are in traffic. You are allowed to get annoyed, but don't let that annoyance, don't let those, irritations become your natural default setting. If you're going to be annoyed at something, choose to be annoyed at it. You're not going to always have the time to actually consider these things, but the more often like you consider that, like, look, it's not impossible that this person cut me off because they are on the way to the hospital to deliver their baby. Like it's not likely, but it's also not impossible. So when you take just a second to go, all right, like everybody in the, we're all living our lives, we're all doing the best that we can. I think about like when I'm stuck behind traffic, or when I see someone drive poorly or like veer out of their lane, I'm like, you're the worst. What, and I get really frustrated. And I'm just like, how could you be so bad at something that's so easy, like driving? Like I get so flustered with something like that. And yet when I make a mistake, because maybe I'm like making the wrong turn, I'm like, oh crap, it's this way. And I do something and I maybe, get in somebody's way or something. I'm very quick to forgive myself, where it's like, oh, you're only human, Brad. Like, yeah, no problem at all. So like if, we remember, we take a second to like think about, it's like, look, everybody's kind of going through those processes. Not everybody is, thinking everything through all the time. It's not impossible that people are doing the best that they can. And, you're much more likely to kind of live like a much more, happier existence, right? And the same thing can absolutely be applied to like our clients when it comes to like exercise and stuff, right? Like understanding that like, if you fall off the wagon in like your fitness journey, right? Taking a second to just imagine like, hey, look, of course, I knew that I was going to have a stressful day, and I knew that like when I'm stressed out, I'm likely to overeat. So like this is something that I want to change, but it makes sense that it happened. So how, if this is something that I want to change, how do I take a little bit more control over this? How can I use imagery and visualize things, be a little bit more mindful, a little bit more aware in the moment so that I can affect positive change? Well, practicing is going to be an effective part of this. And this is why we want to practice visualization. We want to practice using imagery regularly. But it is very helpful to have a structure to this. So we're going to get into that in just a second. So imagery can be used when it comes to exercise technique. It can be used to enhance like the appearance of how you perform in things. It can help you develop your self-efficacy. Remember, self-efficacy is your belief that you can successfully achieve like a specific task. You know, when I went bungee jumping, I was like, man, I don't know if I can jump off this freaking bridge, you know. But in the moments like leading up to it, I was like, all right, when I get up there, I will have no hesitation. And I didn't have a moment where I was like, all right, let's do this. It was like, they were like 1, 2, 3, and I jumped right off, you know. And like, if I had not walked myself through that process in my brain first, I'm not sure I would have like done it. You know, I saw a lot of people 1, 2, 3, and they got really nervous and they kind of like froze. And, you know, the people that were kind of running the bungee jumping thing, they were like, hey, like, you know, it's okay. And like, they would like have to walk somebody through and kind of get them to like do this thing. You know, I went up there and did it, no hesitation at all. Because like I had run through it a million times in my, what felt like a million times in my brain leading up to it, you know? So that's the self-efficacy side of things, right? It can enhance your belief in your ability to actually, you know, finish a difficult task or, you know, whatever. And then, like I said, it can help you with your emotions and your feelings. It can help you like more likely control those things, reducing your stress, for instance. You know, that's probably one of the biggest ones that we all could use a little bit more of. So when you are creating an image, right, one of the things that you are going to consider is our weirdest acronym in this course, which is your PETLEP, P-E-T-T-L-E-P. And each of these are like the things that you are going to consider when it comes to your imagery. Okay. So this is an acronym that's sort of going to help you, you know, let's see, how many letters is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so there's the 8 things that you kind of want to like think of when you are sort of conjuring up an image. Okay. So first thing you need to consider is the physical space that you are in, right? So physically, the image that you are conjuring up should closely approximate whatever motor application or motor execution that you are trying to apply is, right? So physically, you know, if you're trying to imagine yourself getting better at like swinging a baseball bat, right? You need to physically actually imagine swinging a baseball bat, not a golf club, not shooting a basketball. Like, you know, this sounds very obvious when I say it out loud, but like you want to make sure that the physical thing that you are imagining is as closely related specifically to the thing that you are trying to accomplish, right? You also need to consider an environment. Like when you are imagining things, don't do it in sort of a black empty void, you know. Imagine the environment as being like, you know, similar to the one that you are trying to sort of recreate here, right? So the environment, this image should take place in an environment that is very similar or at least familiar to whatever the environment of your physical actual activity is. Again, if I'm trying to get better at swinging a baseball bat, I need to do that while I'm sitting in a batter's box, you know. I'm not, you know, in an empty white room, you know. I've got dirt beneath my feet, you know, that clay. I'm, you know, there's the white, you know, sort of box that's surrounding me, right? There's a catcher behind me and an umpire behind him, you know, like I'm imagining all of those things. Like the environment is similar. I can smell the grass, and we'll get to that in just a second. Task is the first of the T's. Task is your imagined task should be very similar to the actual task that you are trying to achieve. But the other part of task, that's arguably the more important part, is that it also needs to be related to the expertise that you have. So if I am just learning how to hit a baseball, right, then I am going to imagine myself just successfully making contact. I'm not launching a home run, you know, over the freaking green giant or something like that, you know. Like the task should be somewhat similar to wherever you are in sort of your own like learning process. Imagine if you're trying to get better at basketball and you're just trying to learn how to maybe dunk for the first time. You imagine yourself just successfully jumping and touching the rim. And when you can sort of imagine yourself doing that, and then you can actually physically do that, now you start imagining like, doing it with a basketball in hand so that, without losing your grip, and then eventually getting it over the rim and getting it in there, like you sort of like build yourself up to this, me, I'm absolutely horrendously terrible at basketball. So if I were trying to imagine myself dunking a basketball, that is something that is a little daunting. I need to start with some freaking free throws. So the task should reflect like where you are in the learning process. The timing should be similar to how long it takes. I love in the first video I showed you guys that how they asked, they asked you to sort of imagine yourself writing out your, like your signature with your right hand, if you're right-handed, like, and do it with your dominant hand. So like close your eyes and like imagine how long it would take you to write your signature out with your right hand. And it's probably pretty similar to how long it takes in real life. But then like when you do it with your left hand, it takes longer. Like your brain could run through it very quickly, and that's tends to be one of the biggest problems that I have when it comes to imagery. I tend to kind of rush through my imagery really quickly. But ideally, the strongest images are ones that actually focus specifically on moving at the same pace as the actual task that you are trying to achieve. So, don't rush your imagery, don't go too slow, try to make it take a very similar length of time to how long the actual image should take. So that's one of the things you're going to kind of want to pay attention to. You're like, oh yeah, no, I'm moving through this a little bit too quickly. And so then like, you're like, okay, I got to slow that down a little bit. Or maybe you're moving through it a little bit too slowly, okay, that's fine. Yeah, maybe we need to speed it up a little bit, right? So that's the timing side of things. Your imagery should be very similar to the actual time that it takes to perform whatever activity it is you're trying to improve. For me, sometimes, speaking of like imagining like going through specific scenarios and like conversations with people, sometimes I will rush through whatever it is that they are saying, and then I'll just like jump to whatever it is I'm going to say like in response. And it's like, that's not a very effective way to go about imagery, so that's the timing side of things. Learning, the learning should match your stage of learning. So when we look at like the stages of change and things like that, your learning should be like, related specifically to what it is. Again, if you've got a beginner who is trying to like, just start down like the journey, they shouldn't be imagining themselves at the end of that journey. I mean, you can do that actually, and that can be really good for motivation. But if you were trying to get better in the moment, your learning is going to be similar to like the stage that you are in currently. It's like, yes, I want you to imagine yourself running the Boston Marathon, coming in under 3 hours or something. Yeah, that's the end goal. But for right now, I just want you to imagine yourself having like a really good foot strike and really good core engagement consistently over the course of a full mile. Right? Maybe that's where it starts. And then eventually we build it up to 2 miles, 3 miles. And it's like, all right, now let's imagine yourself like going a little faster, like let's work on the speed side of things. So start imagining like new pieces that are directly related to wherever your client is in their journey. So learning and task are somewhat similar. But again, like the idea of the task is that like task is more related to like making sure that you are physically doing the same things that you are currently ready for. And then like the learning side of things is like focusing on, you are doing it from either a beginner, intermediate, advanced, whatever version of whatever it is that you are trying to get better at. Emotions, your emotions should reflect a similar emotional state. Like, ask yourself, are you nervous? Are you frustrated? Are you angry? Are you scared? Putting yourself in a similar emotional space will also be a very important and very effective tool at conjuring up clear imagery, right? Then we've got perspective, and perspective is the most complicated on here. It's the very end of what we're going to consider. And this is where your imagery should both be performed from an internal perspective and an external perspective. So again, if I'm imagining myself trying to slug a baseball, right? I want to first run myself through that entire process in sort of the first person, like I'm seeing things from my eyesight, right? And so I'm imagining myself like, in my body, swinging this baseball bat, right? This is great. This is sort of you imagining you as you're doing it sort of first person. But then it is also very effective to imagine yourself from an external perspective, like as if you are, observing yourself on tape, for instance, right? You're watching yourself. And that can give you a slightly different perspective, which can really enhance your imagery. This is one of the reasons why, and again, I know some of you guys, if you've ever done like sports and stuff, this is why we look at the tape. I will often, I've been squatting, I've been deadlifting, I've been benching for years. And to this day, there are times where I'm like, man, that felt a little funky. That set was just a little bit weird. And whenever I do that, I immediately set up my camera and take like a quick video of myself so that I can see like what was going on. It's like, sure enough, like I'm putting all the weight in my toes and I just sit back onto my heels a little bit more. Oh, I'm let my knees cave in. I thought I had my knees pushed out over my toes. It gives you a very objective viewpoint on things. That's a big part of like looking at the tape. And that is an example of imagery, right? Watching yourself over and over and over again can help you sort of see what your flaws are or what you're doing successfully. And then you can much more easily recreate that in your brain. I was just talking about this to my friends the other day. Like I'm going to go to play Ultimate here in a little bit, in the middle of the day today. And I've noticed like lately I've been like skying a little bit more. We call it skying, where like I've been going up for really, really high passes and jumping a lot higher. And normally like I'm like a tall, lanky guy, but like I tend to be kind of a small player. I tend to like play in kind of a small space because usually the people guarding me are also very tall. And so like if I can get something that's like down at my knees and I'm faster at bending over and like picking that up, somebody else isn't going to be able to guard it, they're not going to be able to get there. And so like that's usually like kind of how I play sometimes. But lately I was like noticing, I was like, man, I've been going up a lot more. And my friends were like, yeah, you've been like going for like high passes lately. And I think that that's coming from a place where like, it used to kind of like scare me a little bit going up high like that, because like you don't have any, once you're in the air flying, you don't really have any control over where you're going to land, but like I started to, I've been imagining that a little bit more lately, trying to kind of like make that a new piece of my game. And so like externally, I have noticed that as I'm like falling asleep sometimes, I've been thinking more about like Ultimate and thinking more about like how I'm going to make like these, like what my posture is going to be, how I'm going to reach my arm up. I just screwed up the camera and things like that. God dang it. Sorry guys, 1 second. Let's see if we can get this thing to focus properly. Come on, back here, camera. Keep going. Focus. Nope. So what if I go back here? Come back in. It's just gonna drive me crazy. Whatever. So that's something that I've sort of been visualizing a little bit more lately and kind of practicing. Now, when you are putting together like an imagery program, things, don't forget, guys, like have some realistic expectations here. Don't just imagine me like, well, if I just imagine every day, I'm just going to, you're not going to become like, I think they say this directly in the ASAP Science video. You're not going to become the next Mozart by imagining yourself playing piano every day. Like you are going to need to do actual physical practice. But this is a tool in your tool belt. We work in a very physical environment. You guys are going to probably work with athletes at some point. And those athletes are going to be, wrecked. You're going to be, they're going to be using their body. They're going to be sore. They're going to be worn out. Doesn't mean that they can't still, develop their skills and work on them. Imagery can be a great way to kind of fill in the gaps. Yes, there it is. During your training, right? And it's a great way to physically continue to get better at stuff, even if you're not physically doing it. But the reverse of that doesn't work quite as well. If you are only imagining things, but you are not physically doing it, you're not burning very many calories, for instance, when you are using your imagination. Although, fun fact, you're burning a little bit more. So it is going to be very helpful for our clients to evaluate their own imagery and sort of, kind of see that where it's like, okay, how well am I actually doing this? And the things that you're generally going to rate your visualization on are the vividness, which is like how much detail you have in your imagery, and the controllability. I tend to have pretty vivid images, but I do struggle with it. I told you guys, I'm not naturally good at this. This is not something that my brain is sort of gifted with when it comes to things. And so controllability is something that like I sometimes struggle with. So if I were trying to imagine myself swinging a baseball bat, all of a sudden a velociraptor walks through the background, because my freaking imagination's running wild. That's not strong controllability. I tend to find that I'm a distractible person, and sometimes that's like something to be aware of that I, kind of struggle with, that I want to improve on. How am I going to improve on it? Right here. So practice is going to be huge. Again, we're talking about practice, not a game. We do want to help our learning skills. We want to increase that effectiveness. The more often I can do this, the better I'm going to get at it. Which, when you say that out loud, you're like, yeah, of course, that's exactly how everything in this universe works. Well, this is kind of why, and sometimes it's important to say these things out loud to kind of remind us, because we take it for granted, So yes, the more often you practice with things, the more often you do this, the better you are going to get at it. Your imagery is a form of practice. And guess what? The more you practice imagery, the better you get at practice. And that's a good thing, It can also be used to generate a little bit of like coping imagery. If you imagine yourself like possibility of like, hey, look, mistakes are going to happen. What is important for you to control is your response to those mistakes, right? You may not necessarily be able to control all the variables surrounding your life, but what you do have 100% control over is your reaction to it. I have no control over the other people that I'm driving around, but I do have control over how I respond to that driving. I don't have control over, arguments that I might have with my roommates, but I do have control over my emotional response. Or at least I can develop that control. We don't always have it, like there are times where like we lose that control. But the more often I practice it, the more likely I am to be able to cope with maybe some negative feelings or negative thoughts, or, maybe I'm going to lose a game, Again, I know I talk about Ted Lasso a lot because I'm obsessed with that freaking show right now. But there's such a great moment in that show where he's talking about how he's like, this sucks. And he's like, this is a hard moment. They like lose a game. That's like a big deal. And he's like, but I want you to be grateful for the fact that you've got some wonderful people in your life. You're going through this loss. You're going through this with your teammates, because I'll tell you, the only thing worse than being, he's like, the only thing worse than being sad is being sad alone, and it's this like great moment. And he's like trying to teach him is like, look, it's okay to like have frustrating moments, but like how you emotionally approach those moments is what's important. Watch that freaking show, guys. It's so good. Also, using recording devices is a really effective way to implement training. Like I said, sometimes it's hard to actually imagine yourself doing things. It's hard to visualize sort of what you look like when you're doing things. But if you can actually record yourself, that's going to enhance that clarity. That's going to, not only help with the vividness, but it will also help with the controllability, because you can sort of see the pace at which you're sort of moving through things. And this is why coaches have been using, taped practice and taped, examples of things forever. One of my favorite things to do, we've talked about this before in assessment classes, but like I love before and after pictures. I actually think they are a super effective tool, and I will often take like before and after videos sometimes. And I have this like Google Drive where I have like all these little like 3 to 4 second little video clips saved under my clients' names. And it's where I am looking at like the angle of their knees and their overhead squat and like actually tracking their improvements. And I love to be like, hey, check this out, and pull up both videos. Like, this is what your squat used to look like. This is what you look like today. And my clients are like, oh my God, like, and they see this massive improvement. Not only does that enhance my credibility by making it be like, wow, well, this training program is working, but it also is a great way for you to like pat your client on the back and be like, celebrate your success. You've been crushing it. Like, give yourself credit for the fact that you've put this hard work in. So let's take a look at how we would implement imagery depending on where our clients are in the stages of change. So again, let's imagine somebody's in the pre-contemplation side of things, right? This is somebody who's not really intending and making a change here within, a 6-month period. So how do we use imagery with someone like that? Well, again, the idea of moving someone out of pre-contemplation is getting them to realize the benefits of a healthy lifestyle, right? We're trying to, usually it's focused around education. That's the best way to move somebody from pre-contemplation into contemplation. So telling like similar stories is a really good example of visualization here, right? Have the clients recount a story verbally about a friend or a relative and how that has negatively impacted their life. And then have them recant like a story. It's like, hey, why don't you tell me about a time like you've seen somebody who, was physically unhealthy, and what are some of the negative effects that that's had on their life? And it's like, oh yeah, it's like, well, my mom always struggled, being physically active, and she eventually like had, she had to have like an open bypass surgery on her heart. And it's like, wow, yeah, that's a big friggin' deal, right? And so then all of a sudden they start seeing, it's like, man, that could be me. And that's something that they want to avoid. And or we could, totally the reverse of that, be like, hey, I want you to imagine like, somebody who actually like successfully did this, and now they feel really better. Like, what are some improvements that someone that they may know? It's like, oh yeah, my friend, Jenny, she started like walking regularly, lost a lot of weight, she started feeling better, she started having more energy, and then eventually like that led her to actually like exercising regularly. So there's a good one, right? That's getting somebody who's in the pre-contemplation stage. Don't have them imagine exercising 5 hours a day, like that's totally unrealistic. But imagine them just like accepting like the benefits of a healthy lifestyle, or accepting the cons of an unhealthy lifestyle, is going to be a great way to get them to sort of see themselves in a place where it's like, man, I should probably, make some changes in my life. Clients who are in the contemplation stage, very similar here, except that it's going to be more specifically related to them. Like pre-contemplators, we're just trying to get them to accept that diet and exercise are important. Contemplators, like now it's like diet and exercise are important to you, like this is where it becomes very personal to them. So sometimes what you can do is you can actually have them write their own testimonial. I use this all the time. I don't actually have them write it down, but I do have them imagine themselves where they're going to be in 6 months or in a year. And I love to use what I call the future you version of things, where I'm like, hey, like I want you to imagine yourself in 6 months from now, patting yourself. I want you to say, you saying, hey, thanks me from the past for absolutely starting down this journey and absolutely crushing it. Imagine how good you're going to feel in 6 months. I love to do that, right? I love to talk about future you. Think about you guys right now, right? Picture future you opening your gym or working with your clients. Like, what's your life going to look like, guys, when you are, working, with 20, 30 different clients, having a positive impact? How freaking cool are you going to feel when you've got that first client that's like, oh my gosh, Thomas, thank you so much for all these improvements. Like, I looked great in my wedding dress, right? And like, I've got these pictures that are going to immortalize that forever. And like, thank you so much for helping me on this journey. And you can be like, oh, my freaking heart. Like, like I feel so good. Imagine yourself, like, guys, after you get your NASM, like, what are you guys going to do? How are you guys going to go celebrate after you get your NASM? How are you going to celebrate after you get your first client? Like, I want you to think about that all the time. And that's going to help you stay on task. Trust me. Preparation stage, you get somebody who's preparing the next day. This is where it's like, hey, I want you to imagine a great start, right? I will often text my friends, text my family when I know like a big event's coming up in their life, or like if I've had clients, actually, yeah, let's keep this we'll keep it to personal training. One thing that I've done for my clients, you know, we talked about goal setting, and sometimes I will have my clients create stretch goals. I mean, not in the freaking COVID world right now, but there have been lots of times where I've told my clients, hey, I want you to like start thinking about like a fun run or something that you're going to engage in. The big one that my clients like to do that I've had them do a lot of times here in LA are the color runs. You guys ever see these color runs? They're kind of like a fun little sort of obstacle course thing where you run through all this like crazy freaking powder. And usually you wear like a white t-shirt, and what that does is it dyes that t-shirt like permanently that color and stuff. That guy looks like he's having so much fun, right? They're really cool. If you ever get a chance, guys, do a color run. They're a freaking blast. Or you can do like a Spartan race, you know, people running through these like mud runs and, you know, swinging off of like, you know, these rings. It's like American Ninja Warrior, the race, you know. Love the Spartan race. I used to do the competitive heats when I did Spartan race. And so like when I know like a client's doing that, I love to text them the day before and just say like, hey, like, you know, it's coming up soon. I want you to, you know, imagine how accomplished you're going to feel. Give yourself the credit for the effort that you've been putting in. You know, take a moment to really pat yourself on the back. And I want you to imagine how good you are going to feel when you cross that finish line. You know, I love to send those texts. It's like one of my favorite things. Big long text messages. So like where you get preparers, that's like a big part of it. That's the version that I would do. But having your clients say like, hey, I want you to imagine like preparing a healthy meal and how satisfied you're going to feel when you're like, hey, I learned a new cooking skill. I learned how to do this. I learned how to make like something healthy that I also am like really satisfied, that I really enjoyed. Imagine what it's like on day one, walking through the gym. Clients who are in the action stage, like I said, a successful like, hey, tomorrow's the day. You are going to kill it. You're going to crush it. I want you to imagine like how accomplished you're going to feel when you walk through that finish line. These are words that often come out of my mouth. Well, they come out of my thumbs. Or, you know, sometimes like one of my favorite, a good one here too, is imagine the daily grind. The three of you guys, imagine what it's going to be like, you know, rolling out of bed every day, like going to the gym and working, you know, or, you know, rolling out of bed, like working with clients every single day. Imagine the texts that you are going to get to send somebody someday. Imagine this motivating thing that you get to say to someone in the next, like, you know, soon, right? That's the daily grind. Recant like where, hey, maybe it was, what was the challenge that you dealt with this week? Imagine that, and like how'd you overcome it? Well, remember the fact that like remember what you did to overcome that challenge. That's great. Like, you know, give yourself a pat on the back for friggin' being creative and overcoming this. And then maintenance is where it's like, again, how to get people to stop falling back on something. Like, again, look at Alcoholics Anonymous. They're such a good example of like an organization that has like used psychological principles to help tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of people. One of my favorite versions of this is like, what do they do when they're trying to get somebody to stay in the maintenance side of things? It's like, hey, now that you are not struggling as much with this addiction, you need to inspire others, and they become like a sponsor for someone else, and then they are like that other person to like lean on, you know. That's getting to the next level, right? I deal with my clients all the time. I'm like, hey, imagine like, you know, what's the next thing that we're going to focus on? What's the next hardest thing that we're going to do? You know, that keeps somebody in the maintenance. It's like, hey, we lost a bunch of weight. Well, let's see if we can get the abs to show up, you know, like, let's see if we can get that line right there on the, you know, where the bicep and the deltoid meet. That's the next step. Imagine, you know, you got 135 pounds, you got that first like 2-plate press, right? Let's go with 225, you know, like I want you to imagine getting there next. And that's like, oh my God, I don't know if I could ever hit 225. And I was like, not an option. You know, I don't want to hear the phrase, I don't know if I can, you know. I want to imagine like where you're going to get next. So that is using imagery. These are sort of all motivational things that you get to tell people someday, which is so freaking exciting. Yeah, I may not be like naturally gifted at imagery, but I freaking love it. And I think inspiring stories are such a fun sort of part of this, find some fun videos, find some good Instagram posts, find all that stuff. That's what's so funny. You look at my Instagram and, you would, if you were to look at my Instagram, you'd assume that I'm somebody who is like in the middle of a weight loss journey. Because it is just full of like, I love before and after pictures. I love like seeing somebody be like, this is my 6 month, those posts. Freaking love that stuff. And I've done it with countless of my, my clients. It's one of the weirdest, dorkiest things about me, but I will often look through my own clients, like before and after pictures, to motivate myself sometimes and be like, Jan can do it. So can I, so that is imagery in a nutshell. This is one more tool in our tool belt to use with our clients. Again, you don't have to use all of these, but you can use any of these. How you guys feeling today? Thomas, Bay, how you guys feeling?
Feeling good.
Yeah? Motivated? Excited?
Indeed.
Love it. It was a little bit of a shorter one today, guys. But I'm going to send you out of here. I hope you guys are, feeling motivated enough to, if you've already worked out this morning, maybe you're feeling motivated to go do a second one, or maybe you're going to hit it a little bit harder today. I hope that you are feeling inspired. I hope you've got some fun stories to tell. Today is the last piece of homework going out. This is day 6. So tomorrow we've got our final lecture. It's going to be on social influences and interpersonal relationships and how we can use those. Also, we will be reviewing our NASM chapter. So we'll actually be going into the textbook and being like, all right, we just talked a lot about exercise psychology. Here's the parts that are actually going to be on your test. So it'll be the sort of filtered out version. So we're going to knock out 2 PowerPoints tomorrow. It'll be a really good class. And then we are meeting up on Friday. So that'll be really fun. We're going to kind of piggyback on what we've done. Last time, we did movement prep. The time before that, we did sort of the exercise side of things. Well, Monday, we're going to put it all together. Or Friday, not Monday. We're going to put it all together. So that'll be really fun. All right, guys, let's kill the recording here.